Okay, so next I want to do some scattering of objects on my terrain, and we can use a Heightfield scatter for this. And let's just dive in, and we're going to create a new geometry and dive into this. And we want to fetch our terrain from that previous object, but let's just go up and have a look at what we've got again. So we've got this boundary edge here, and we've got the Heightfield, which has been converted to mesh, and you can see it's points and polygons. But we want to work on the actual Heightfield still. So let's just create some nulls for areas we want to use. So I'm just going to create a null here. And on this one, I'm just going to call this mesh out. And then I'm going to create another null, drop it from my history. And then before my Heightfield convert, I just want to output this, and this will output my actual Heightfield. Middle mouse, we've got our 2 volumes. And I'm just going to call this HF out. Or let's call it main HF out, main Heightfield out. And I'm just adding these underscores in here just to promote them to kind of the top of the list when we search for them. And let's have a look at how that looks. So I want to go back here and go back to my geometry and just go inside there, and let's do an object merge. And let's just go to this object 1 and click that. And now if I just minimize this geometry and I look at my Heightfield turntable, you'll see I've got this main HF null and the main mesh out, and we obviously want this one. And you can see the underscore just puts it at the top of the list instead of using numbers or uppercase or anything. I prefer just lowercase and not to use numbers. So this is just a workflow preference for me personally. But it just allows me to have quick access of these objects in the list. So I'm just going to enter this, and now we've got our terrain coming in. So our Heightfield, just double check that, yes. And now let's have a look at how we can scatter objects on this. And we have a node called Heightfield scatter. And we drop this, and we say it says required terrain. And then there's a scatter mask basically. And then we've got primitives to instance. So let's just plug this first one in and see if we get anything. So nothing works. We've got just, looks like a bunch of points happening over the surface. And that's definitely scattering something. You can middle mouse on it and see we've got 518 points now being scattered along the surface. But we want some geometry on there. So to start off, I'm just going to create a box. And I'm going to plug this into primitives to instance. And now you can immediately see, maybe we'll give the box one of the axes a little bit longer, make this a bit shorter, so we've got kind of a slightly elongated box or rectangle, so we can see how they're orientating. And you can see it's basically scattered over this whole surface. There's no overlapping parts. They're kind of spaced quite nice and evenly, and their orientation is fairly random. They are generally following the surface of the terrain. So that's quite nice as well. And we've got some options to control this now. So the first thing we want to do is try and limit this. And this is where the second input comes in. And we can utilize this mask up here. So just to branch it off quite nicely, I'm just going to drop another null here and call this mask. And let's view that. So this is obviously our Heightfield with the mask, but it will only recognize the mask in the second input. So we'll just plug that in. Now view our scatter, and now we can see I've got scatter objects along that mask. And before we look at any other settings now, what we could possibly do is something like a Heightfield mask noise. Let's try that, mask noise. Plug that in. And now you can see, well, we're viewing this mask, which is kind of weird. And we've got now these copies everywhere again. And they're scaling up and down, and it's odd. So let's actually have a look at what the mask is doing here. So we've got this noise we've added here, and the combine method is actually set to add. So what it's doing is just adding on top of our existing mask. And what I can maybe do is just bring down the element size so we can see the noise properly. And then when we view that, we can see we've got, okay, well, it's obviously there's noise happening here, but we can still see this mask, and this is kind of visually off-putting. We don't really know what we applying this scatter to. So we've got another node before we carry on here. We've actually got a mask clear, Heightfield mask clear, and I can just plug this in here. So if I view my incoming, and then I can just add this on, and it's basically gives you that the mask is still there, but it's got a 0 value and it's cleared out, so you don't get that red. And now I can plug this directly into my scatter, and now you can see we're not obstructed by this mask that we had here, and it's not putting us off and confusing us. So let's just have a look at our mask here again. Now obviously ideally we don't want noise out here, so we can, on our Heightfield mask noise, we can change the operation, and let's maybe try subtract, and that could work, or perhaps multiplier. That also works. We're multiplying by the value, and that gives us a slightly more interesting result. So now we're only going to scatter. If I go back to my scatter, you can see I've got, and just comparing the actual mask, I've got these red areas and they're fading off and getting quite light and quite heavy red areas. And what the scatter is actually doing is it's scattering in those areas, but it's scaling down the scatter points based off that density of that mask. So that's really cool, because then we can start, messing with perhaps the some of the post-processing of the mask, and we can maybe make it sharper like this. There's a bias here we can mess around with, and if we view our scatter while we're doing this, you can see we're getting some interesting areas. We can get quite a bit of breakup happening, some additional kind of information that we might want to have. And then let's just have a look and see some of the options on the Heightfield scatter itself.